1780, and the American Revolution is going badly. Very badly. America's rebel government is broke, its soldiers unpaid, and its armies are losing to the British in the South and stalemated in the North. Lost to the Revolution reveals the untold stories of the American Revolution's final days. As the tide turns and the war is won, with a little help from our friends, the French.
They don't tell us about why we're here. They don't tell us where we're going. We're just soldiers. We're doing our job. We're getting paid. We're getting fed. That's all that matters.
And also a little help from Rhode Island's mostly African-American 1st Regiment.
I get paid equal with my white counterpart. The problem is, we rarely get paid. Continental Congress are not exactly good on their words when it comes to supplies and payments.
Being a slave, my master signed me up. So I didn't really have a choice.
Also lost to the Revolution, the story of Marquis de Chastellux, a top general in the French Expeditionary Force. He is fluent in English and close friend to Washington, Jefferson, and Franklin.
Chastellux's crucial role in the American Revolution was thought lost because his archives were thought lost.
Chastellux's archive was recently uncovered by Iris de Rode, a Dutch historian, having been hidden away for centuries in a French castle.
He was considered a crucial participant of the American Revolution, both, as Franklin would say, by his sword and by his pen. Because with his sword, of course, he participated in the Battle of Yorktown, but also in the preparations of that battle. But with his pen, he wrote about the American Revolution, and he wrote about a lot of enlightened principles of his age.
In 1778, France allied itself with the American cause, first with money, and then in 1780, France sent an expeditionary force, but initially, it was a much troubled alliance.
The French were Catholic, the Americans were mainly Protestant. Their language, of course, was very different. When the French arrived in America, they were looking down upon the American officers, especially the soldiers and their militiamen. They were, according to them, undisciplined, untrained. And then on the return, the Americans looked upon the French as being arrogant, as being effeminate. French would wear wigs, they were wearing makeup, they had a way of showing off their uniforms that was not very, let's say, American.
The Americans, none of them seem to be professional soldiers. We do our best to keep our camps separate and our men separate because the poor discipline of the American army has rubbed off a bit on our men.
There was a notable exception. The 1st Rhode Island Regiment comprised of mostly African Americans.
And we thought they were very well trained, very well possessed. They're the only ones that have really impressed us to a high degree.
As a historian, if you look at the sources, the French actually really describe the Continental Army's specifics more than the Continental Army's officers do themselves. So by looking at the French testimonies, one of the most interesting aspects is that the French describe the amount of black soldiers in the different army units. They, of course, describe the famous Rhode Island Regiment, but they also describe the other regiments and how black soldiers are actively participating in the war. And so these led to a large corpus of sources of the French on the American Revolution that contain a lot of unknown stories for us today.
At first, the Allies argued over strategy. Washington presses to attack the British in New York City.
George Washington was really inspired to attack New York throughout the entire war. He wanted to crush New York. He wanted to attack that British center of power. But when the French came in, the French realized quite quickly that New York was a very dangerous campaign to perform because the British had already fortified the city. And Rochambeau and Châteauroux and the French staff was pushing him to not make that very dangerous decision.
The French prefer laying siege to British forces in Yorktown, Virginia. In May 1781, Washington and Chastellux and France's commanding general, Rochambeau, meet in Connecticut to agree on a battle plan. A decision is made. Go south to Yorktown.
In his archive, you can find a lot about this Yorktown campaign, about the march to Yorktown, about the preparation phase of Yorktown. It's sometimes called the miracle of Yorktown because it was such a complicated campaign. The French Navy had to arrive from the Caribbean, troops had to come all the way from New York, marching down south in a very hot climate.
It's typically marching for about 3 or 4 days in a row of about 20 miles a day, then we'll take a few days off. We're typically starting our march at about 4 a.m. and stopping around 2 in the afternoon. It's been very wearing on the men. We have 6,000 infantry with us. The Americans have somewhere around there.
General Washington told us that if we can bottle up Cornwallis and Yorktown, we can end the whole thing. We can end up beating those bloody British, those lobsters.
In September 1781, off of Virginia's northern coast, the French Navy meets and defeats the British, gaining control of Chesapeake Bay.
The French Army and Navy are, of course, essential for winning Yorktown, for winning the battle, the siege, but also the sea warfare that happened all at the same time. The French Navy was the most essential because they could block the British and especially prevent the British fleet to also come into this Chesapeake Bay close to Yorktown.
With the Chesapeake secured, French and American troops surrounded Yorktown. Soon, a turning point. The 1st Rhode Island captures a key British outpost. The regiment's enslaved soldiers hoped that a victory might both win the war and secure their eventual freedom.
A whole lot of talk about freedom. And talking about freedom to a slave is right up my alley. So if they, in fact, live up to the freedom they like to talk about for everybody else and share it with us too, then it's worth fighting for.
Outmanned and outgunned, Cornwallis surrenders. As the British Army band plays, the world turned upside down. Meanwhile, their former American masters now forces thousands of slaves freed by the British back into servitude.
When Châteauroux was traveling around in the young United States, he of course observed the practice of slavery. He did condemn it because it was really opposed to the freedoms, the liberties, everything he was fighting for, and where he really believed in as a philosopher of the French Enlightenment.
The progress and reason of humanity will soon alleviate slavery and will one day destroy it. Slavery is a disgrace to humanity. Marquis de Chastellux.
The whole story of the American Revolution is highly linked to slavery. Army soldiers that were fighting in the war were from African American descent. Some were free, some were enslaved, some were recently freed in order to fight in the war, but would be enslaved again later.
Soon after Yorktown, America gained its nationhood.
Some had hopes to be freed after the war, which was not happening.
But in this new nation, all men are not born equal. Some are free, others are in bondage. A painful harbinger of the bloody American Civil War, 80 years hence.